I think we should be concerned about the reconfiguration of global security. And, Pax Americana, which has been very much the international system post World War II, is coming to an end. And you can see the sort of maneuvering that's being carried out, particularly by China and Russia, to create a new international security system. That's the problem at the moment. Maybe it will come to a much more aggressive confrontation at some point in the future, but I think that's quite distant.
Now, we were talking about this story earlier on this morning with Richard Spencer, who was at this parade, but China hawks have been dissecting this huge military, march of weaponry and different military figures in China, trying to work out what the new generation of weapons means for warfare and their ever-tightening bond between Russia, North Korea and China. Donald Trump is understood to be mulling over the establishment of the Department of War, but can a divided and dysfunctional West prepare for a new age of global warmongering? Well, Sir Richard Dearlove is the former head of MI6 and joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Kate. How are you?
I'm great, and it's lovely to have you with us. How concerned do you think the West ought to be about the images that we've seen of this parade, which I think is the biggest ever in China?
Yeah, well, it's theatricals to start with, and communist regimes are very good at that and put a lot of importance on them. But I think there is an undeniable fact that behind the theatricals lies a significant and really serious military build-up, which is designed to support Chinese aspirations or China's aspirations to become a superpower, having, let's say, been more the status of a regional superpower.
One of the things that we know that President Xi has spoken about is this sense that the military in China needs to be ready to take Taiwan by force by 2027 if he decided that was a priority. Is that now a realistic prospect, do you think?
Well, a lot of the build-up has been to create an amphibious capability which would allow the People's Liberation Army to carry out what would be a very difficult military operation, which is, the invasion of Taiwan across the Cross Strait. And so a lot of the focus has been on that. But I think the evidence of this parade shows that China's ambitions as a military power are much broader and much wider at that. I would question whether they actually need to invade Taiwan. They could easily carry out a blockade which would achieve, let's say, 85, 90% of their political ambitions and force the Taiwanese government in a direction politically that it wouldn't otherwise go.
And that, I assume, is something that Western powers couldn't or wouldn't be able to prevent.
Well, if there wasn't a direct military conflict, then it would be very difficult, let's say, for the United States to intervene. And the blockade could be carried out over a long period of time. And actually, we've seen the assembly of significant naval power around Taiwan as a demonstration of what the People's Navy, Liberation Navy, could actually do or achieve.
Do you think even in that context, a blockade context or a military intervention, do you believe at this moment in time Donald Trump, because it would really be America that would have to lead, would be willing to step in to protect Taiwan?
Well, I think the evidence would suggest that Trump would avoid direct military conflict with China. We see in his policies a reluctance to get involved militarily. Look at the example of Ukraine. Interestingly, Biden had said that he would intervene, which wasn't formally American policy, and that was a statement which was modified after it was made. I think the evidence suggests to me that Trump would be very reluctant to confront China over the Taiwanese issue militarily. There would be other ways, of course, like blockades. Sanctions on China, the other sort of instruments of pressure that we're all familiar with.
We've obviously seen at this military parade, we've got Xi Jinping, President Putin, Kim Jong-un, but we've also seen in recent days, photos of President Putin holding hands with Narendra Modi, and that meeting with Xi as well. How concerned would you be if you were still the head of MI6 looking at those images?
Well, obviously concerned. I mean, China's support for Russia in Ukraine is crucial to Russian success there. There is talk of what they call the CRINC alliance, which includes, of course, North Korea and Iran as well. You could see that Modi, because of the secondary sanctions imposed on India for purchasing Russian oil, have had an impact on Russia's attitude towards China. So you see a bit of a honeymoon there. But I mean, bear in mind that Modi holding hands with Putin, traditionally over a long period of time, and going back to the Cold War, India's relations with Russia were always close. And India's been very clever against playing both ends against the middle. I mean, I don't think we should overinterpret some of those signals and signs. They're worrying, they're a concern, they do have maybe long-term strategic implications, but they don't, in India's case, signify a huge change in policy. I mean, Modi's in a difficult position because he has had these whacking secondary sanctions imposed on him, you know, and they're not going to stop, or they say they're not going to stop buying cheap Russian energy.
So we shouldn't be concerned about World War III at this point?
I think that would be a massive over-exaggeration. I think we should be concerned about the reconfiguration of global security. And, you know, Pax Americana, which has been very much the international system post-World War II, is coming to an end. And you can see the sort of manoeuvring that's being carried out, particularly by China and Russia, to create a new international security system. That's the problem at the moment. Maybe it will come to a much more aggressive confrontation at some point in the future, but I think that's quite distant.
We've been talking on this programme this week about patriotism, largely around the discussion of flags and people displaying flags around the country. Do you think people here in this country would sign up to fight if they ever needed to, or feel strongly enough about their identity in this country to do that, if it ever came to it in the future?
Yes, I'm sure they would if the threat was serious. I think, I mean, we're in a period when international relations is in mutation and change. And I think the general public maybe are beginning to realize that we are in a more concerning and worrying security situation in Europe. And, you know, part of that is going to be, you know, massive build-up in defense spending. That means a larger army. I think the government have got to think about very carefully how they recruit more people into the armed forces, and of course what priority they give to that expenditure. But I think you can begin to see a shift in public thinking. You can certainly see this reflected in the media. Look, here we are talking about it. I think that's important. I mean, personally, I wouldn't rule out at some point in the future some sort of national service being introduced. It's going to be introduced in Germany. It's going to be introduced in other European nations. And this may sound sort of rather outlandish prediction, but that is, it seems to me, the direction in which we're traveling.
Would you welcome it?
Personally, I would. I think if it would create a cohesive national identity, I think for young people to serve their country is probably a good objective. I'm not suggesting in the armed forces. There are many other things that young people could do for 18 months or 2 years of their lives, like, you know, supporting the National Health Service or being auxiliary police. I mean, there are many things that they could do which would represent national service, which would have benefit for them and benefit for the country. And it may be that we have to follow, let's say, Germany's example and go in that direction. I mean, interestingly, when I was in Germany recently talking to a lot of people, the young people I spoke to were all enthusiastic about the idea of national service. I was quite taken aback. I would have expected completely the opposite reaction, but that's not the case.
Well, it's always fascinating to speak to you, Sir Richard. Thank you very much for your time.
Kate, all the best.
That is Sir Richard Dearlove there, the former head of MI6.